It started like any other crisp morning on my ranch, tucked away from the bustle of the city, a quiet sanctuary where the rising sun blanketed the hills in gold and the only sounds were the calls of meadowlarks and the soft creaking of the windmill. The kind of peace money couldn't buy and bureaucracy couldn't reach, or so I thought. That illusion shattered the moment three SUVs came barreling down the gravel path, dust trailing behind them like a warning signal from the heavens. I was saddling my horse when I heard the tires crunch against the earth, far too fast for anyone who knew how to handle country roads. My instincts, long sharpened by both courtroom battles and political wars, tingled. Something wasn't right. The vehicles screeched to a halt just beyond the corral. Doors swung open in unison, like a coordinated dance, and out stepped six men clad in what appeared to be tactical gear. Sheriff's Department, one of them barked, flashing a badge too quickly for anyone to verify. They wore sunglasses and utility belts, the kind of outfit designed more to intimidate than protect. Before I could utter a word, they marched toward me with a self-righteous urgency, brandishing a flimsy-looking document they claimed was a warrant. I didn't need more than a cursory glance to spot its flaws. Wrong formatting, no seal, the judge's name was printed instead of signed. Still, they tried to play it straight. You are under arrest for non-compliance with neighborhood codes, illegal fencing, and unauthorized livestock expansion, one of them said with a flat, rehearsed tone. Neighborhood codes. On a 300-acre ranch zoned for agriculture since the 1800s. I couldn't help but smirk. This wasn't a joke, it was a sloppy power play. I asked for identification again. This time I was more insistent, and that's when the bluster started to unravel. One man fumbled for his badge, clearly uncomfortable under my gaze. Another kept looking back at the SUVs like he needed to run. They weren't law enforcement, not by a long shot. And they had no clue who they were talking to. It would have been easy to stop them right then, to reveal who I was and end the charade with one phone call. But I wanted to see how deep this rabbit hole went. I played along, just enough. Mind if I get my coat? I asked, gesturing toward the porch. One of the imposters followed me, hand twitching near what I assumed was an airsoft gun spray painted black. That detail made my stomach turn. Pretending to be law enforcement was bad enough. Waving a fake weapon in a high-tension situation. That was a recipe for disaster. Inside the house, I calmly picked up my phone and opened the secured line reserved for emergencies, state emergencies. It took less than 30 seconds to get through. This is the Attorney General, I said. We have a situation. Possible impersonation of officers, trespassing on private land, armed confrontation imminent. Coordinates transmitting now. No drama, no raised voice. Just facts. I'd learned long ago that panic wasted time. By the time I stepped back outside, the faux officers were getting agitated. You've got 2 minutes to comply, one barked. I gave him a look that probably told him more than I meant to. He shifted uncomfortably. I didn't need to say anything else. The sound of helicopters in the distance changed the mood instantly. Dust swirled again, only this time it wasn't from SUVs, it was from state trooper vehicles arriving in force, coordinated, precise, unmistakably real. The imposters froze, eyes darting, legs twitching. A couple dropped their props and bolted toward the woods, but they didn't get far. My land has cameras, drones, and more surveillance than most federal facilities. The moment those pretenders stepped foot on my ranch, their time started ticking. The scene turned surreal. Troopers took control, weapons raised but calm, methodical. The fake cops were restrained, read their actual rights this time. One of them kept yelling, I didn't know. They told me this was a code enforcement job. Another looked ready to cry. But I had no room for pity, not when someone had tried to violate the sanctity of my home with lies and intimidation. And then came the real twist. The documents they carried weren't just fakes. They were modeled after actual code citations issued by our local HOA. An HOA that had long tried to stretch its claws beyond the suburban edges into land it had no authority over. My ranch was never under its jurisdiction, but that hadn't stopped them from sending letters, threats, and now, apparently, armed actors. Turns out, the HOA president, an ambitious man with delusions of legal expertise, had concocted a wild plan. After years of trying to get me to comply with ridiculous guidelines like paint color approval or fence height harmony, he decided to escalate. He hired a private security firm, dressed them up like deputies, handed them forged documents, and gave them a mission: bring me in, or scare me into compliance. What he hadn't factored in was who I was. Not just a rancher. Not just another landowner with some cattle and a few stubborn mules. I was the Attorney General of the state, the top law enforcement official, someone who wrote the regulations they were pretending to enforce. As the handcuffed imposters were loaded into real patrol cars, I walked up to the last one still protesting his innocence. Next time you impersonate a cop, I said quietly, make sure your warrant has the correct letterhead. And maybe don't try it on the one guy who signs your prosecution orders. By noon, the entire operation was being broadcast on local news. Journalists scrambled to cover the story, while the HOA scrambled to scrub their records. But it was too late. I had everything: footage, audio, forged documents, and 6 very talkative suspects. I made sure the charges would stick: impersonation of law enforcement, unlawful entry, conspiracy to intimidate, and a host of other fun legal fireworks. But that was only the beginning. Because if they thought I was going to stop at arrests, they really had no idea who they were dealing with. The sun had barely crested the hill when I heard the familiar crunch of gravel under tires. I was out by the stables feeding the horses when a black SUV rolled up the long drive. The ranch had seen its fair share of trespassers, mostly curious kids or lost hikers, but something about the posture of the men stepping out of the vehicle didn't sit right. They were dressed like law enforcement, but anyone with a trained eye could see the inconsistencies: the ill-fitting uniforms, the mismatched badges, the way one of them kept glancing around like he was looking for an escape route. This wasn't standard protocol, and it definitely wasn't official. They approached me with a strange mix of authority and hesitation. The taller one, who seemed to be in charge, pulled a folded piece of paper from his vest and declared, "You're under arrest for violating HOA Code 34B, unauthorized construction on protected land." I raised an eyebrow. Protected by whom? I asked, already knowing the answer. The Homeowners Association had been pestering me for months, claiming my fence line was 2 feet over their imaginary border. I had ignored them, of course. My ranch wasn't part of their jurisdiction, and I had the original deeds and plat maps to prove it. The second man moved to cuff me, but I stepped back, careful not to escalate things yet. Who signed the warrant? I asked calmly, eyes scanning their name tags, if you could call the Velcro patches on their chests name tags. One said, J. Morris, the other, Deputy L. Green. No last names on government-issued IDs. Suspicious. Morris hesitated. This isn't a warrant from the county. The HOA has delegated authority to act on its own codes. I laughed then, couldn't help it. That's not how the law works, gentlemen. Even if I were under HOA jurisdiction, which I'm not, you'd need a real warrant, signed by a real judge, enforced by actual law enforcement. Green's hand dropped to his belt, resting near what looked like a taser. It was plastic. Not even regulation. I stepped forward just enough to let them know I wasn't afraid. You do realize impersonating an officer is a felony, right? They glanced at each other. The confidence they'd rolled in with was quickly draining from their posture. Look, we don't want any trouble, Morris said, backpedaling slightly. Just come with us and this doesn't have to get messy. At that point, I knew they had no idea who I was. They probably thought I was just some rancher too stubborn or too slow to push back. They didn't know they'd walked onto the property of the state's attorney general. I could have revealed it then, but I wanted to see just how far they were willing to go with this charade. I'll come, I said, holding out my wrists. But first, let me grab a few things from the house. They nodded, too smug to realize they'd just given me a tactical advantage. I walked slowly toward the house, keeping my movements non-threatening, then stepped inside and locked the door. I picked up the phone and dialed the sheriff directly. We'd known each other for years. I kept my voice low but firm. Tom, it's me. Got a couple of impersonators on the ranch claiming they're making an HOA arrest. There was a pause. Tell me you're joking. I'm not. Black SUV, 2 men, fake uniforms. Looks like they were sent by the Prescott Hills HOA. I'll be there in 10. Don't let them leave. I hung up and walked back outside, this time with my badge around my neck. I let it hang there in full view as I leaned on the porch railing, arms crossed. I have a feeling your day's about to get much worse. Morris squinted at the badge. Green visibly swallowed. This some kind of trick. No trick, I said. You just attempted a false arrest on the Attorney General. That's not just a mistake. That's a career-ending, jail time-earning decision. They turned to run, but it was too late. 2 county cruisers pulled up the drive, followed by a third with the sheriff himself. Tom stepped out with his hat in one hand, a look of pure disbelief on his face. You weren't kidding, he muttered. Nope. The deputies had Morris and Green cuffed and in the back of a cruiser within minutes. Their SUV was searched. Sure enough, inside were stacks of fake citations, HOA documents, and a list of addresses, mine at the top. Apparently, the HOA board had decided to take enforcement into their own hands after losing a series of court disputes. But they didn't hire private investigators or attorneys, they hired actors. Literal actors from a local security firm turned vigilantes for hire. I spent the next hour giving my statement and watching the sheriff's team dismantle their little operation piece by piece. The best part, I hadn't even had to raise my voice. The fallout came quickly. Within days, the HOA president resigned under pressure. The remaining board members were hit with lawsuits from multiple residents, all citing harassment, fraud, and abuse of power. As for Morris and Green, they were charged with impersonating law enforcement, attempted unlawful detainment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The security firm that hired them was shut down, pending further investigation. I held a press conference the following week. Not because I wanted the spotlight, but because people needed to know this wasn't just about me. HOAs across the country had grown emboldened, often blurring the line between governance and tyranny. My message was clear. Being part of a neighborhood association does not give anyone the right to circumvent the law. That day on the ranch reaffirmed what I'd always believed. Power, even petty power, attracts those who think they're above the rules. They counted on me being intimidated. They counted on me backing down. But they miscalculated in the worst way. Out here, we settle things with facts, not threats. And if someone wants to play cowboy on my land, they'd better be ready to ride straight into a courtroom.